Soldiers called it the aluminum coffin, the flesh box, and even the tracks of death. But this metal box became one of the most important vehicles of the Vietnam War and beyond. It carried its soldiers through hell and back, and this is the story of the most produced APC in history and its fascinating to outright bizarre variants. The beginning of armoured vehicles was in the early 20th century, as militaries worldwide sought efficient ways to transport infantry under armoured protection. The concept of an armoured personnel carrier began taking shape even during World War I, with the British Mark IX being the first APC, appearing in 1918. However, it came at the end of the war, and the concept was abandoned. In the interwar periods, armoured warfare gained significant traction, and ways were sought for infantry to be able to keep pace with tanks that were now significantly faster. The first solution was using trucks, but they were extremely vulnerable to enemy fire and basically unusable on difficult terrain. Then the half-tracks came into widespread use, especially by German and American forces. Besides having some protection and delivering troops quickly and directly into combat, they could be modified for a variety of roles such as mortars and anti-tank platforms. However, they weren't very well protected and, although much better than trucks, they also struggled in rough terrain and lagged behind the tanks. So, a fully tracked vehicle was needed, with the British Universal Carrier or American M139 being the first such examples. They would lay the groundwork for later M75 and M59 APCs. However, in 1956, the US Army requested a new, fully enclosed, lightweight, amphibious and air-transportable APC. They came up with two prototypes, the steel T117 and the aluminum T113. This innovative aluminum armor caught their attention because it provided similar ballistic protection as the steel variant, but was far lighter, allowing it to be amphibious and air-transportable. After testing, the T113 was selected and went into production as the M113. They didn't know it at the time, but they were about to come up with one of the most widely produced and used vehicles. Weighing 12 tons, battle-ready with 209 horsepower, it had good off-road capabilities. It could cross rivers without any preparation, powered through the water by the motion of its tracks at a speed of 3 miles per hour. It was operated by a driver and commander, accessing the vehicle through roof hatches, and could carry up to 11 soldiers who mounted and dismounted through a rear hydraulic ramp, but also had a hatch on the roof. On top of the commander's hatch behind the driver was mounted the 50 caliber machine gun. Aluminum armor ranging from 12 to 38 millimeters was designed to withstand small arms fire, but you are going to hear more about that when the Vietnam War came. In front of the vehicle was the engine, and the front plate was slightly sloped for better protection, while all other sides were vertical, giving it a box-like look. It quickly proved to be simple, versatile, and reliable, and quickly got the nickname Battlefield Taxi for its intended role. However, that role would quickly change. Its initial gasoline engine and interior fuel tanks proved to be a fire hazard in case of a mine strike or armor penetration, and were later replaced with a diesel engine and fuel tanks outside of the hull. The upcoming Vietnam War was about to become a testing ground for this new APC, and it was going to be intense. At first, 32 M113s were delivered to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and in initial engagements, a couple of things were immediately noticed. Although it was intended to transport infantry, with this being the Vietnam War, everything was different and unconventional, so its role and tactics had to be adapted. The Vietnamese army first realized that infantry were very vulnerable during dismount and quickly lost coordination and communication with vehicles. The second issue was the open gunner's position. At the Battle of Apbach in 1963, 14 M113 gunners were killed because of their exposed position. They quickly improvised shields for the 50 caliber machine guns until standardized shields and later all-around turrets came, significantly improving the survivability of gunners. Since the Viet Cong was not equipped for anti-armor combat at the beginning, the M113 worked just fine with minor tweaks. However, RPGs, recoilless rifles, and especially mines and IEDs could tear apart its aluminum structure, and that was soon to be discovered. It is actually the Vietnam War that made the M113 infamous for its flaws. Soldiers described it as a metal box, and after seeing what would happen to them if hit, they preferred to ride on top of the vehicle rather than stay inside. The cramped, dark interior was uncomfortable, especially in the hot, humid conditions, and it was terrifying to be inside one during a firefight. Although riding on top exposed soldiers to small arms fire and shrapnel, it gave them situational awareness, and soldiers preferred to be outside if they rolled over a mine or got hit by an RPG. However, riding on top instead of inside the vehicle had more reasons. The Vietnamese army soon started to treat the M113 as an infantry fighting vehicle rather than an armored personnel carrier. Soldiers riding on top could fire at the enemy and immediately jump into the fight without losing the momentum of an assault. The US troops eventually adopted this approach, realizing its effectiveness despite the increased risks. The M113 was modified extensively, transforming it into what became known as the Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicle. All-around protective shields for the commander and gunner were added, and M60 machine guns on either side with enough soldiers to man all weapons, usually 7 of them. In assaults, troops riding on top were delivered directly into combat, using fire, maneuver, and shock action in coordination with other combat units. Even additional weaponry, such as 57 and 106mm recoilless rifles, grenade launchers, and even miniguns were mounted for additional direct firepower. The M163 Vulcan version even had a 20mm rotary cannon firing 6,000 rounds per minute. Although it was designed as an air defense system, in the Vietnam War it came in handy as direct fire support. The M113 also proved to be the ideal platform for installing a flamethrower. Flame gun components were fitted inside the machine gun M1 cupola from M48 and M60 tanks. Even 351 self-propelled flamethrowers were produced this way, and they were deployed in many more operations than the famous M67 flamethrower tank. A coaxial-mounted machine gun was used to suppress the enemy and close the distance, with support from other units to quickly come in range for the flamethrower. Wet bursts were an interesting method used from World War II, where first the flamethrower would spit a jet of unlit fuel to soak the target. Then a second flame burst would set everything on fire with horrific effect. It was great for search and destroy missions, especially in terrain suspected to be booby-trapped, as fire would activate most of the mines and traps and destroy equipment. However, serving on one was anything but safe. Accidents were frequent, and a combination of a high amount of fuel with aluminum armor and a weapon that must be used at almost point-blank range made it unpopular among soldiers. There was also an M113 version designed just to carry additional fuel for the flamethrower and refill it in the field, and quite a few accidents were reported. They were used much more in combat than shown and talked about, most likely due to their horrific effect. Another interesting version was the M106 mortar carrier with a 4.2-inch mortar mounted inside the vehicle and fired through a roof hatch. It carried 88 mortar rounds, was quick and easy to set up, and offered protection to its crew. So, the M113 was turned into a mobile firepower platform capable of leading attacks or defending against ambushes. Eventually, this aluminum box, despite all its flaws, became arguably the most effective armored vehicle in Vietnam. It was also used for medical evacuation, cargo transport, and as a command post. However, its aluminum armor was still a weakness. It could stop small arms fire and shrapnel, but was extremely vulnerable to RPGs, recoilless rifles, and landmines. Since, due to the difficult terrain, the movement of vehicles was mostly easily predictable, the danger from mines was great, especially for the light M113, which was not designed to withstand powerful explosions like tanks. The 57mm recoilless rifles, armor-piercing machine gun ammo, and RPGs were in great supply to the Viet Cong later in the war. They could easily ambush US convoys hidden in thick vegetation. Because of that, steel plates were added on the underside, in front of the driver, and even sandbags on the floor from inside. It cramped the already uncomfortable interior even more, but at least it offered some protection. Also, different improvised external armor was added to detonate RPG warheads away from the main armor, such as chain-link fencing and razor wire, while panels inside prevented spalling. These modifications slightly improved its aluminum coffin reputation. The M113 also had a significant jungle-busting role, where it would drive in front of infantry to create a path and activate possible anti-personnel mines and booby traps, laying down heavy suppressive fire in case of an ambush. Many hard-learned lessons in the Vietnam War are responsible for numerous modifications and upgrades of the M113 that would follow. It would also inspire the Bradley fighting vehicle that was about to come. Over 80,000 M113s have been produced, making it one of the most widely manufactured armored vehicles in history, with over 40 different variations. But its story after the Vietnam War was far from over. It saw extensive action in wars and skirmishes around the globe, like the Iran-Iraq War and even Operation Desert Storm in 1991. It saw massive upgrades in the Cold War era and was used later in the Balkans in peacekeeping missions with improved slat armor for RPG threats.